Today, as we celebrate Black History Month, I'd like to discuss a woman who recently died, really made an amazing contribution in terms of our country and in terms of trying to achieve justice in a situation that was a difficult situation and a confusing situation for many people. The lady's name is Mary Alice Jervay Thatch. And her grandfather, R.S. Jervay, started a newspaper called the Cape Fear Journal in 1927 in North Carolina. This was decades after a mob of white supremacists burned the Daily Record, which was an African American newspaper, and it was burned to the ground in the 1898 Wilmington Massacre. So these white people got together and they didn't like what was being published in the newspaper, and it really was a victim of kind of just people getting out of control, and these different incidents would happen and people would get upset and do some kind of crazy things. And it was a sense of really saying that we as white people are superior to you as black people, and so we want to kind of put you in your place. And that was the situation in many communities, unfortunately, in the South, and difficult to deal with, but people persevered through that situation. Her father, Thomas C. Jervay Sr., was the publisher of the Wilmington Journal. So this idea of newspaper uh, kind of in the blood of the family. You know, the grandfather, the father, and now Mary Alice took it over, and in 1996. And one of the things that she really kind of campaigned for, and one of the incidents that truly remarkable, was the incident of the Wilmington Ten. There was 9 black men and 1 white woman, and they were wrongly convicted of firebombing a grocery store in 1971. And Mary Alice took up this cause and was very instrumental in helping to achieve justice for these people. What happened in 1969 is that there was a racial integration of the Wilmington high schools, and the city decided that they would close a black school called the Wilston Industrial High School, and to kind of achieve this integration. And unfortunately, as part of that, they laid off black teachers, black principals, black coaches, and this led to some friction. It creates kind of a bad sense in the community because here you're integrating, but then who's losing their jobs? None of the white teachers lost their jobs, but the black teachers did, and naturally there's going to be some resentment there. And there was resentment in the community because this was a school that was really thriving and doing well. Um, the separate but equal doctrine wasn't always, separate but equal. It was separate, but a lot of times not equal. But certain schools did thrive, and this was a school that apparently was doing very well. So members of the Ku Klux Klan chapter and other white supremacist groups began patrolling the streets because of this friction between the white students and the black students at the school. And they really kind of promoted this sense of hatred there, and they hung an effigy of the white superintendent of schools because, from their perspective, this wasn't a good thing that you're integrating the schools, obviously, and then you have, on the other hand, the black students and the black community that's upset that their school is really being closed and none of those teachers and coaches are being hired. So there's this underlying tension there, and you can see why it would be difficult, certainly on both sides. White people were not used to being in schools with black students, and the black students upset about the school being closed, so that the friction there. And so they hung this effigy of the white superintendent of schools. Naturally, he became the target as a superintendent, and they cut his phone lines, so a couple of nasty things for him. And then street violence broke out between the Ku Klux Klan members who were patrolling the streets and trying to take over the streets and saying, well, this is Klan territory. And a lot of black men didn't like it, obviously. And so this was the 60s, and there was this idea of fighting back and this violence between them. Students boycotted the high schools in January of 1971. They said, enough of this. And so they started to integrate in 69, and less than 2 years later, we have this the boycott. So in February, the United Church of Christ sent 23-year-old Benjamin Chavez from their Commission for Racial Justice to Wilmington. He had worked with Martin Luther King Jr., and he had some credibility in terms of the black community. And they said, well, maybe you could go down there and calm things down a little bit. So he went down. February 6, 1971, Mike's Grocery, which was a white-owned business, was firebombed. Firefighters said they were shot at by snipers from the roof of the nearby Gregory Congregational Church, where Chavez had been meeting with some of the students. So Chavez was gathering the students together, and he was trying to teach them how to do this boycott in a nonviolent way, and to try to really kind of advocate for their demands. And he met with the students there. The neighborhood erupted in rioting. That rioting lasted through February 7th, so it lasted for 2 days, and 2 people unfortunately died during the rioting. The governor called up the National Guard, and they entered the church on February 8th, and they removed the suspects. The guard claimed that there was ammunition in the building, and that was kind of disputed back and forth. Was there really ammunition? Or was this a kind of a nonviolent group? It kind of went back and forth, and one side is saying, no, we didn't have any ammunition. The other side, we had the ammunition. So the violence resulted in 2 deaths, 6 injuries, and more than $500,000 in property damages. And that would be the equivalent of $3.2 million in terms of today. So you can see quite an extensive amount of damage was done. Chavez and 9 others, 8 students and an older white female, she was an anti-poverty worker, they were convicted of the testimony of 2 black men. They were sentenced from 34 years to 15 years, with Chavez getting the 34 years, getting the larger amount, and the social worker, Ann Shepard, the white woman, getting 15 years. Most got 28 or 29 years, and most were either 18 or 19. So we're dealing with students, younger people who were penalized by this. The sentence was considered to be severe punishment for a fire in which no one died. So no one actually died in the fire, but the rioting after the fire. So they said, well, there wasn't any, deaths here, or, why this large sentence. So it was considered to be kind of extreme. When President Carter admonished the Soviet Union in 1978 to holding political prisoners, the Soviets cited back to him the Wilmington Ten as an example of Americans doing the same thing. So here was Carter saying, in terms of human rights, why do you have these political prisoners? Why do you put them in gulags? Why do you do all this? And they said, well, what about in Wilmington? These people, why are you putting them in prison? Why are you giving them such large and long sentences? Why are you doing that? In 1976 and 1977, 3 of the prosecution witnesses recanted their testimony. Said, it wasn't true, we were lying, and so they recanted. In 1978, Governor Jim Hunt reduced the sentences. So here you have, somebody recanting their testimony, and then a year later, year and a half later, the governor says, well, we'll shorten the sentences. Well, thanks a lot, how does that help? It really help? I mean, they recanted their testimony. Why can't we get out of here? Would be the normal reaction, right? In 1980, 2 years later, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the conviction. And again, the courts, they work slowly, so you can see this took a while. The prosecution did not disclose exculpatory evidence under the Brady disclosure. So there was evidence that would have gotten them off. The prosecution decided, well, we're not going to give them that evidence. Thanks a lot, guys. So they said, this is not a valid conviction. The trial judge erred also in not allowing the cross-examination of key prosecution witnesses about special treatment that they had received. So when you get special treatment to be a witness, it's got to come out. I mean, you've got to reveal that. And the trial judge did not allow it in, and the Court of Appeals said, well, wait a minute here, why didn't you allow that evidence in? And it ordered a new trial, but the states choose not to prosecute because obviously at this point they didn't have much of a case, and the 10 were released. When Governor Perdue granted a pardon of innocence, each of the 10 were given then $50,000 for each year that they served in prison. The families of the 4 who were deceased received no compensation, but the families have petitioned now for compensation. They said, well, they're deceased, but they did serve this time in prison. Shouldn't we get some compensation as well, which seemed fair? In 2012, outgoing Governor Beverly Perdue issued pardons of innocence for the entire group. So Mary Alice successfully advocated for this, did a lot of stories, publicity about it, and so she brought justice. And I think as we celebrate this special month that we dedicate to Black history, this is an important incident to remember, and Mary Alice certainly an important woman to celebrate for advocating for justice, as we all try to do, each in our own way, to try to bring more justice, more fairness, more equity to our own local communities, to our churches, to our country, and throughout the world as we work for justice. So let us celebrate this wonderful month together and thank God for those like Mary Alice who become advocates for justice.